Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Stone, Director of the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice at the Jacksonville Urban League. And this is part of a series of virtual town halls that we have on pre-law, what it's like to go to law school, how do you get into law school, what the experience is like. And I'm really grateful for the effort that our intern team put together for this. Our lead uh, uh, introducer, I guess I would say, is Diwa Jahar. And then wanted to also thank Sadia Barge for her being our coordinator and making all these things happen. So at this point, I will turn it over to you, Diwa, and look forward to hearing the questions, answers, and more.
Perfect. I'm going to start sharing my screen so we can look at the slideshow I put together. Um, so give me one. Okay. Um, so yeah, thank you everyone for being here and for watching this video if you're tuning in. I just want to take a second to explain how the event is gonna go. So I'm gonna start off by introducing our four amazing speakers, and then there's gonna be a series of questions, guided questions to um, guide the flow of the discussion and the conversation. And then there'll be an open question at the end if any of us have any questions. So I guess starting off with the introductions, I'll start off with Cindy. Cindy Jeans, a first-year law student at GW at the George Washington University from Broward County, Florida. She attended Howard University, where she studied political science and minored in sports administration. She took some time off after graduation, where she worked as an educator before returning to school. She has a keen interest in policy work, particularly sports diplomacy and education law. And at GW, she serves as a student ambassador, first generation professionals representative, arts, culture, entertainment, sports society representative, and an open door scholar, which we'll go more into later. And our second speaker is Susan Rosso, who is from Davie, Florida, and is a first year at GW with an interest in public defense. She serves as the director of the Food Security Committee for the Student Bar Association and is a member of the Equal Justice Foundation, GW Defenders, and Street Law at GW Law. She's also the founder and director of Devoted to Babies, an organization through which she organizes drives to collect resources for premature infants in the neonatal intensive care unit and children in foster care. And then our third speaker is Jishan Ahmed, who is currently a second year at GW. He originally is from New York City and is the son of two immigrants born in Bangladesh. Because of this, he's been exposed to many struggles of life, which has shaped his legal career towards movement, lawyering, and advocating for large political and economic changes. Last summer, he worked at the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, where he witnessed how law and progressive politics intersect. This summer, he will be working with a civil rights litigation firm, helping protesters and prisoners retain their rights. At GW, he's a student editor of the Journal of Law and Technology, academic director of the South Asian Law Student Association, vice president of GW Lawmakers Society, and a member of the Mock Trial Board. And then finally, our last speaker is Byron Martinez, who is a graduating 3L at GW Law School. He's originally from El Paso, Texas, but graduated from St. Mary's University with a bachelor's in communication studies and a minor in political science. He's a member of the Federal Circuit Bar Journal and is the Inns of the Court program coordinator in the first year Foundations of Practice program. At GW, he's worked at the Neighborhood Legal Services, the National Advertising Division, several law firms, and the Federal Trade Commission. He's most interested in advertising and brand protection law and family law. So that was a long introduction, but thank you so much for all the speakers for being here. And if everyone's ready, we can get started with the questions. So first off, I just wanted to ask that first generation students like yourselves often face a lot of difficulty when applying to law school because of the lack of information and resources to guide them. So I was just wondering, how did everyone navigate the application process without a family background in law? And were there any resources or tools you used? Feel free to unmute, and this will just be an open discussion. So if anyone's ready to go ahead, feel free.
I'm happy to start. So in my year in between undergrad and law school, I worked at a personal injury law firm with an attorney who had at that time 49 years of experience under his belt. And I really relied on him for any and all of my questions. And while there was a difference in the application process from his time and my time, it was really nice to get his intake on what I should write on in my personal statement and my interest statements, and just how to narrow down law schools and how to narrow down and focus on the financial aid process of things. And it's just important to get your questions out there because none of your questions are ever going to be dumb. So it was nice to be able to talk to another attorney, even though he wasn't related to me.
Yeah, I could go next. I went right through undergrad to law school, and honestly, I didn't really have any help. I didn't ask that many people. I just asked the advisor at my undergrad, and it was just the basic answers that you would expect. But I kind of just used Google and I used like online resources, Kaplan, just to like understand how to navigate the process. And for financial aid, I kind of just used whatever tools I had online and just calculated the positives and negatives of each university.
Yeah, I can go next. What I did, I found a lot of pre-law programs that would be helpful in navigating that space, the application process. I know University of Miami has a free pre-law program. I was also part of the LSAC Plus Guided Journey, which is a year-long program that gave LSAT prep and application material prep. So I think that was very helpful in me having the adequate resources to go through that law school application process.
Yeah, I also went straight from undergrad to law school, so I was really constrained on the community that I was able to leverage. I didn't find much assistance from my undergrad either, and so I would say that I definitely navigated it with a lot of self-initiative, whether that was just reaching out to different schools I was interested in applying to, doing my own research into like LSAT prep courses or the application process itself. And I think while it's important to reach out to anyone that might be, around, I think it's also important to look into what you need to do for your own success. And I think that led to me finding different resources. Like I use Seven Sage because they have a fee waiver that if you're in a certain income quartile, they'll make sure that you get the entire access to the course for a discounted amount. And you can also get fee waivers through LSAC itself that help lower the cost of applying as well. And you can reach out to certain schools. I know, especially George Washington University Law School, they're willing to talk to any students that have questions about the process as well. So just finding those offices to call and contact, I think really helps. And there's a huge stigma associated with just the process and how scary it is. So I think just reaching out and asking my questions helped, especially since I didn't have that family network giving me that support.
Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. So moving on to the second question. Um, Transitioning from undergraduate college to law school can be really difficult. It's a big change with new people, expectations. The techniques of writing are very different from undergrad. And so I was just wondering, what's the biggest adjustment during your first semester in law school, and how did you navigate that? What did you do to overcome it?
I can go. I think for me, because I took 2 years off, it was a big transition from working full time and then to being back in the flow of a student. I wasn't used to going home after school and then having to study all night, or all evening. And so I think that was a really big adjustment, of the workload. And so I really had to, figure out, okay, what is my study schedule going to look like? Am I going to study more during the day? Am I going to treat it like a 9 to 5, which was really helpful as well. So I didn't have as much to do when I got home. But it was a trial and error for sure.
I think for me personally, it was just like the environment of the learning, like the classroom, because undergrad it's a lot different. You have like professors lecturing off PowerPoint slides. Maybe you don't even have to say a single word in your class. But when you go into law school, you have very engaged professors that could call on you at any moment. You're expected to always be prepared, and you're also expected to come into class with a strong grasp on the material. And I think in the beginning, when you're still parsing through legal jargon and you're just trying to understand how to learn, I think it's really difficult. So I definitely think like leaning on a community and forming relationships with mentors who have been in your shoes is really helpful, and it helped prepare me as I got through it. But part of it is just kind of knowing what to expect and powering through because it's definitely different from undergrad, but that doesn't mean that you're not qualified or prepared for it.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that, I think the biggest one is that in undergrad, professors could like check in and you have multiple assignments, but in law school, you just only have that one big exam at the end. And you could go to class and take notes, but if you don't go to class, the professor won't call you out, they won't reach out. It's your responsibility, and you really need to own up to that. And like Susan said, like you should rely on 2Ls and 3Ls. When I was a 1L, I relied on Byron a lot, and that really helped me through my 1L experience.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo off of what everyone else has said, I think everything was a huge adjustment for me. I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't really know, like, I moved to DC and I had zero friends here. I had no community here. I didn't know like, who I could call on for questions. Um, but I think everything with time, everything comes naturally to you. Like you have to like stick to your old habits while also forming new habits. So one thing that really did a lot was sort of calendar my time because that's what had worked best for me in undergrad, and I knew that it would work for me in law school. But I also really relied on the 3Ls and 2Ls above me, and that's why it's been such a big important reason for me to or pass on sort of that wisdom and pass on that torch to the 2Ls and 1Ls that have come after me. Because law school really is just school with reading. And that's what my mentor told me before law school started. And using that in the back of my mind has really helped me a lot with like even imposter syndrome.
Okay, good to know. Um, and then moving on, so I think all of you guys are open door scholars, and so basically what the open door scholarship is it provides $45,000 annually to 10 selected law students and also provides additional academic support and professional support. So since all of you have experience with this, I was just wondering, are there any resources that were unique to the scholarship that you found especially useful into easing your transition into law school, finding internships, or gaining professional skills?
Absolutely. The best thing about the Open Door Scholarship is your access to the deans of the law school. It has been incredible to form such unique and one-on-one personal relationships with like Dean Caesar, Dean Tiberio, Dean Belk, and just like have them sort of in the back of your hand, like knowing that they're always going to support you. But not just that, they've opened up their own networks to us and sort of have helped really did help me find a lot of funding for my first summer because it was unpaid. So it was just like that was probably the best resource that I could have gotten out of the scholarship. But not only that, since it's such a small cohort of people and we're only four cohorts in, we've all kind of just become like this one little family that kind of check in on each other and we try to make sure that everyone is doing okay and sort of helping each other with whatever we need.
Yeah, to kind of build off that, I think for me, the biggest thing was the community. Like, it's really difficult to find people at this law school that you can connect with, and especially when it's so intimidating in the beginning. But I think not only does it give you like unparalleled access to the deans, but it gives you unparalleled access to your peers that you can really grow to understand, and 2Ls and 3Ls that can mentor you. And I think for me personally, like, there's been a lot of times where Jishan and Byron have been able to like ease my fears or get me through like harder moments or teach me things. Like Jishan was my mock trial coach, and so he taught me professional skills. And so I think like once you have a network, it really opens you up to not only their network, like Byron said about the deans, but also, access to internship ideas of just what you can do on the day to day to make your life a little easier and make everything a lot smoother of a transition. So I definitely think the community is the biggest draw, and it really does gain you a support system through whatever you're going through or whatever challenges you may face.
I could go next. I think echoing everything what was already said, but I think the internship aspect is great. I have Open Door Scholar on my resume, and every single interview I've been asked, what does that mean? Because it's not really it's a very unique thing to GW, and it stands out, and employers want to know. And when you explain what the scholarship entails, it's an impressive criteria. So it really does help you getting internships. And also, you just also get a community. I was friends with the 3Ls when I was a 1L. I asked them for advice. I constantly asked Byron for advice. I asked the other 2Ls who are in the cohort as well. So I had no friends entering GW, so just having the group of 10 already was nice and having that community.
Not to beat a dead horse, but to more so echo what everyone's been sharing, I think the community has been such an amazing asset of being an open door scholar, especially having access to all of the deans. I know Dean Caesar has been very maternal to me and making sure that I've been applying and staying on top of my schoolwork and just navigating law school itself because it can be a very difficult experience by yourself. And so, just echoing what everyone said, the community I think is one of the best parts so far.
And if I can just add one more thing, because the scholarship is so new, I feel like the deans who are running it really take to heart what we have to say and like any feedback we want to offer, especially about how the program should continue moving forward. So it's great for us to have a place to be supported while also offering advice for other resources that would be useful for the next cohort or for the next year. So it really has been like such a blessing for all of us.
Good to hear. And then this next one is an issue I know a lot of students, college, like undergraduate and law students face. But there's a large emphasis on building professional networks, and it can honestly be a little bit tricky for students to do so. So I was wondering, how did you approach this networking? Has it been beneficial to you in securing internships? And I would also love if you guys could specify how networking has differed for you in undergraduate versus law school.
Yeah, I can go. I didn't do any networking in undergrad. Like it was not important whatsoever in Texas. It basically did not exist. But in law school, I really have seen it as sort of a way of making friends. I don't ever see like an attorney as someone that like I'm going to get a job out of. And in fact, you should go to networking events with the preface of knowing that you're not going to get a job from any of them in that moment, but they will get you one step closer. And networking has really helped me get pretty much all of my internships. And so it's beneficial, but you should see it as more of like a way to get to know someone rather than a way to get something out of someone.
Yeah, I'm in the similar boat. I did not do any networking in undergrad. It wasn't really a big thing when I graduated in 2024. I think that's a little different now. I think a lot of undergraduates do a lot of networking, but in 2024 I did not. I was just networked with my professors mainly, but in law school I did, and I same thing as Byron. I kind of just used it as a tool to make more friendlier connections, and through that every single internship I've gotten through the school year and summer, and this upcoming summer, it was from networking. I have not really applied to that many things. I've just networked and then sent a follow-up email, got coffee, and then have been like offered the job. And like in law school, if you're more authentic and better, it's better for networking skills.
I also agree. I did not network in undergrad. Very naively, I was like, okay, I have Howard on my resume. That's enough. I'm cool. But coming into law school is definitely a skill that I had to hone in on and learn, and something that I really appreciate. There's the larger networking events, of course, but I really like the one-on-one coffee chats that you can have with different attorneys, but also with the professors within the law school. GW has such a great network that you could just reach out to a professor at GW, and they will respond and just give you insight, whether it's navigating the legal journey, but also navigating law school as well. So I think it's it's a skill that you will learn while you're in law school, but it's a very helpful skill.
I think for me, I did a lot of informal networking throughout my life because of my nonprofit. So it really rested on me forming relationships within the community. And because of that, I would just like contact different places asking if I could like donate resources there, whether that was like foster care organizations or like making connections like with the town of Davie specifically. But even that was really just rooted in like me reaching out, saying that I had this idea and asking for just some support or like to be able to contact, different individuals. And I think what's really different about law school is networking can feel a lot more formal, especially for anyone that wants to like go into like any firm work. But I think like the biggest thing to remember is that, I think someone mentioned it already, like if you're authentic and you're sincere, that really does come across. And like, I heard from someone that said like there's nobody that wants to talk more to potential lawyers than lawyers, right? They love to talk, they love to get to know you, they love to meet with you. So if you just send out like an email or reach out to someone and just say, I'm interested in maybe doing what you do and I'd love to hear from you, they're really open and they're really supportive. So I think approaching network with that ease and like less pressure on yourself to mean like I have to get in this door versus let me just learn a little bit more about what this work would mean and get to talk to someone that's involved in it. I think that's a very beneficial way of viewing it, and it definitely does pay off. I think, forming connections, like even if you don't want to exactly do a line of work that someone you're chatting with is doing, they often have a million connections that they can put you in touch with, firms to let you look at, organizations to get in contact with. So it's really just you start with one person and then it kind of blossoms from there. And I definitely recommend it to anyone coming into law school and even people in undergrad as well.
Thank you guys. And then next, a central theme that many first generation students often feel is imposter syndrome, which is the inability to feel like one's success is deserved. So I'm just curious if there were any moments where you experienced imposter syndrome, doubted yourself, or second guessed your interest in law. If so, how did you handle that? And I was hoping if you guys could share any personal stories that you may have experienced.
Yeah, so as a 3L, I have had my fair share of imposter syndrome. But the heaviest moments of it were after getting our first year grades, or our first semester grades, my 1L. Um, I instantly wanted to drop out, and I thought I did not like deserve to be in law school. But I spoke with Dean Caesar and a couple of my other professors, and they said that law school really is a learning curve. You will get better every and every semester. Even if it's small growth or even if it's like not exactly academic, like you still become a better attorney with every semester that you go through. And another thing that I would say is imposter syndrome should not be something that crosses your mind because you get into law school because you belonged. Like your application did not accidentally end up on the acceptance list. It was put there because somebody saw like your potential. So you should really use like any sort of fear to fuel your overall purpose.
Yeah, as a 2L, I also felt a lot during 1L, not that much in 2L, but in 1L, especially after I got my con law grade back, that's when I felt a big heavy toll of imposter syndrome. But I think what really got me through it was that in law school, especially, grades do not dictate what you will do. As it's prevalent that I'm working as a civil rights attorney and I did not do well in constitutional law, but that's my interest. But if your interest is in one field and you don't do well in that class, that doesn't really dictate what you're going to be as a lawyer because real life and exams are not the same. So I think I've been told that by 2Ls and 3Ls and the deans constantly, and you're just reminded of that and you just push through.
I think for
Yeah.
me, like there's a lot of moments of imposter syndrome, but like outside of, I guess, the grade context, like it was really prevalent in the beginning. I remember like sitting in orientation and we were like in law school, you'll have like a smaller class where it's like your writing class. So there's just like maybe 20 people in the room and we were all going around like introducing ourselves and our backgrounds and I went straight through undergrad. I actually graduated a year early, so I was 21 and I was sitting in a room hearing people that had practiced as paralegals, had gotten their master's in legal studies, were like 26, 27, 28, like, and I just was like, am I as capable as them to be in this environment? Do I have the skills that will lead to me being successful? And then there's that moment of comparison, like even if I am, they're probably going to be better because they have more experience. And I think like one thing that really helped was building my own community because there are a lot of people in law school that come from different backgrounds, whether it's different age groups, different levels of education, different income backgrounds. And the more you find your people that can make you feel and like comfortable and see the value within yourself, I think it gets a lot easier to remember that you do belong there. And also just like talking to like mentors or friends that I had relationships with before law school and having them remind me if ever the doubt crossed my mind to be like, look how far you've come. Because sometimes it's hard to see the progress you've made, but your friends and everyone that's been there for you throughout it can remind you, like, you really have overcome so much. And so you have earned your spot there and you will do great like you have before. But it is completely natural. And I think having conversations about it and admitting like not only to yourself but to others that it's something you experience is like kind of the first step.
For me, I definitely started feeling it more right after first fall semester grades came out and people started posting their job offers for the summer. That's when I really started questioning whether I belonged, whether I was capable of becoming an attorney. And I really appreciate what Susan said about having community. I know for me, having community outside of law school is what's really helped me. Um, I I think it's important to have that community outside of law school just so you're not so involved in every waking second of your day in your readings and in your grades and all the networking and everything like that because it can drown you and help you. It will lead you to forget who you really are outside of, wanting to be a lawyer. And so I think having those moments where I can just relax and talk to my roommates or just go get ice cream or whatever it is, just having those moments of realization and grounding, I think is really, really important. And so I think that's what really got me out of that funk really at the beginning of spring semester. And will always have those moments, but those grounding moments, I think it is what has helped me.
Thank you. So next question is, what strengths do you think first generation students specifically bring to law school, and how would you suggest that future first generation students capitalize on these skills to succeed?
I'll go. I think a really big strength that first generation students bring is determination. I think about my grandparents. My grandma wasn't allowed to go to school. I'm the first person in my family to get a higher education degree. And so that alone is a driving factor for me to even finish. And so I think sometimes when you forget your why, like, why am I doing this? Why am I going through the endless nights and the long nights and the crazy days? I think back to, my grandma, who didn't have that opportunity. And I think that that alone is enough to get me going through the day. And so I think that it can be challenging, it could be frustrating being the first person, but I think that in the same way, it's an honor. It's a honored to be able to do that. And so, um, yeah.
Yeah, I think first gen students really bring just themselves and our perspective. Law is a very secluded and elite institution, and it has been in America for decades. And even right now, first gen even entering is the biggest success story. And I think just us being here is the win. And our perspectives are things that students have never even heard of, especially at elite universities. And I think that's the driving factor for myself. Same thing with Cindy. I'm the first one in my family to get even an undergrad education and then now a higher education. So that's really what's driving me to then bring my perspectives on economics and politics and the legal system to an elite institution is also a very big win.
I think law students, first generation students specifically, bring resilience. We have gone through challenges, faced adversity, and it's made us stronger. And I think that has prepared us to weather the storm that law school brings, whether it's moments of the imposter syndrome, whether it's challenges in the classroom, but also in the legal field, because I think we've seen an unprecedented time, especially in the public interest space, where we really need people and lawyers that are prepared to stand in their positions even when things get more challenging. So I think I've really embraced that throughout, my life. I think that's made me stronger as I've gone through this process because it isn't easy. And I think that Sydney and Jishan are also completely correct. Like what fuels that resilience to make sure it doesn't get exhausting is when you have purpose and you know the not only the value of like you getting that education, but also making sure that you say certain perspectives in the classroom because if you weren't there, then maybe there wouldn't have been someone to vocalize that and change the way that your peers are thinking about the law or change the way that the law is moving. So I think it's a really big skill and it's a really unique feature to be able to contribute to a law school community. And I think it prepares each of us to succeed moving forward because we don't know anything else other than to persevere and succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely echo what everyone else has said. I think purpose, resilience, and drive are incredibly necessary in law school. Um, but what I think my greatest strength and what other first generation students bring is their like complete lack of awareness. Like you don't know what to expect. You have no preconceived notions about what a law student should be or how you should act. And like at least for myself, like in my 1L year, I had this like light bulb moment where I finally understood how to write an exam and how to write like my briefs or my appellate briefs. And that was like everything to me because it meant that I had finally sort of cracked this code and I did it without having to like sacrifice who I am as a person, but rather as like I finally learned the skill. And I think that more students need to realize that it's perfectly fine to be first generation. In fact, you should celebrate it and like preach it from the tallest mountain you can find, but use that to your advantage to like sort of learn more and like never forget your why.
Thank you. And then this is the last question. It's a little bit just more general. But what's one piece of advice you guys would give to first generation pre-law students that we may not necessarily get from advisors or professors? Something unique from your experiences as law students.
I think my biggest advice would be not to sacrifice sleep. Sometimes if you don't get your readings done, it's not the end of the world. Just go to bed and get 8 hours, 9 hours, even 10 hours. Just prioritize sleep. That would be the biggest advice.
Kind of piggying off that, I would say sometimes it really is about quality over quantity. Like, I think there's this huge pressure from advisors or from just the law community. Like, you need to do more constantly to be able to succeed. And I think that it's the quality of the hours you put in, it's not the amount, whether that's studying for the LSAT, whether that's writing your applications, whether that's how many hours a day you're reading, because I think a lot of us know as first gen, like your time is limited. It does have to go to other responsibilities because of the burdens you carry. So don't think that just because you can't put in more hours compared to someone else that it doesn't mean you're going to be successful because truly at the end of the day, like it's just about how you're going about things, how strategic you're being, and how effective they are tailored to your own needs rather than just like broadly, how many hours that you're working.
I would say something that Dean Caesar said during orientation that really stuck out to me was not drinking someone else's tea for your sickness. And I know it's like an old Caribbean proverb, but I think that's really, really important because you'll hear so much advice from so many different people about what you should do and how you should be navigating things. And it could be very difficult, and you can have decision paralysis, like what should I be doing? And you'll see other people doing things and wonder if you should be doing that too. But at the end of the day, it's really about what you came into law school to do and what you want out of your legal degree. That's it. It doesn't matter what your mom thinks, what your teacher thinks. It doesn't matter. It's really what you came in to do. And so I think really remembering that as you go through your journey, I think is really important.
Okay, it's so hard to just give one because I'm a 3L, so I have so much wisdom to share. But I'm gonna like give you my three like short spiels. One, be yourself. Like genuinely, you can be yourself and still succeed. I have talked about like reality TV in multiple job interviews and have gotten all of them. Like you can be yourself and succeed. Two, do one thing a day that makes you happy. Like be selfish and intentional with your time, even if it's an hour of scrolling on your phone or watching TV, like do it to make yourself happy. And then three, pass along the torch as soon as you possibly can, because like I would not be where I am today if someone didn't give me the advice that they had given me. Or and I know that I have had some sort of impact on Jishan and Susan because I gave them some advice. So if you can pass along words of wisdom, the quicker the better, then you're better off for it.
Hey, thank you guys for answering all those questions. That was all the guided stuff I had. So if Sadia or Dennis, if you guys have any questions, feel free to pitch in. I do have a follow-up question, but I can wait till you guys ask yours.
I did have a part,
Was
but
somebody
I'm
trying,
not
was
able
somebody trying to make a comment?
to express
Sadia, I think your audio is cutting out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just saying thank you for sharing your experience. Me personally, I'm a first generation student as well, trickling through all of the things, but not necessarily for law. But I definitely learned something still from you guys, and keep up the good work and continue to pass the torch, like you said. It was amazing to hear from you all.
Yeah, I was a first generation law student. Um, and luckily, my mother had gone to UC Berkeley and graduated in 1940, and and I went there after she did, so I had the benefit of her insight for undergrad. But we didn't have any lawyers, at least um, close enough geographically for me to talk to and learn. But I did, the truth is, I really didn't learn to study until I took the bar exam. I realized I had a photographic memory of sorts, and I could memorize these graphs. Of um, I was so busy working during law school, in the law school, which was a terrible thing to do, that I never really got a chance to become a student until I took 6 weeks off to study for the bar exam. But I can definitely sympathize with the challenges that you faced in terms of we didn't call it the imposter syndrome. I think it was just inadequate, inadequate. We felt inadequate, and but it didn't keep me from having a great career in law and doing a lot of different things. Starting law schools, becoming a dean a couple of times and a president a couple of times, and um, my question is, given what's going on now, I'm fascinated to know. It doesn't directly relate to the topic, but I think it's on a lot of people's minds who are watching this uh, on YouTube. Um, how has the law school responded to the changes going on in the way the law is being respected, the challenges to the rule of law? I can remember when we had serious problems, which were not nearly as serious as compared with what's going on now. We would gather and have uh, common lectures discussing the problem, bringing in experts. So how is GW responding, particularly where they are in DC, to what's going on in terms of rule of law?
One thing that I've personally witnessed is they've really leaned into building a strong public interest network or embracing the community that exists. Our dean hosts a law and democracy talk once a month where she brings together different leaders in that space and talk about different ways to preserve threats to democracy. And I think that they are doing the best they can to bring a culture to students about like part of getting your legal education is being able to push back on some of the abuses towards the law that we've observed. And so part of the way that I see myself gaining my legal education is I'm acquiring the tools and the resources that I need to be able to become a lawyer who can fight for our rule of law to be respected. But I definitely think it does get challenging as a student to kind of be in this environment and be observing all of the things and the practical ways that the law is supposed to be followed. And then, I'm sitting in constitutional law and I'm learning about this ideal, but we're not really respecting that. So it definitely does come with the challenges, but I think it is, I think someone said to me, this is one of the hardest but most vital times to be getting a law degree. And I do think that really stands true.
And as a first generation law student, um, do you feel that gives you kind of a perspective, a helpful perspective?
For sure. I think that it makes me have hope because I have faith within myself. I have faith within my community to fight against changes that we've observed. And I think change is possible. And I think that if I wasn't a first gen law student, I don't know if I would be able to be so optimistic or have so much faith because I've seen how hard work pays off in my own life. And I'd like to hope that with lawyers that are applying themselves to fight these challenges and kind of the community that we're trying to build in the public interest space. I think that it gives me a little bit more faith, but it doesn't make it any less more difficult.
Thank you. That's
Yeah, I could quickly add one thing. I'm taking a domestic terrorism seminar class this semester, and it was extremely relevant and prevalent in today's time in politics. And I think taking a seminar, and you could take seminars in 2L and 3Ls, and I would highly recommend you do, because you analyze real world situations at real time. And we analyzed the Minneapolis situation, we analyzed real world stuff when it was happening during class. And I think that's the best part of law school, as you understand the legal consequences and you understand the policy consequences and the political ramifications of what to do and what not to do as a lawyer. And our professors, I'm taught by professors who's been in the federal government since the 80s. So they're a little shocked of what's happening and they have a very niche perspective of what is the institution. And as a first gen, we bring different perspectives and perspectives that maybe they've never heard of because these professors are just so in tune of what they think for the last 30, 40 years of how the institution has been going. So I think first gen, we just bring a better nuanced take on things of law.
very good. And I think that's inspiring for people that are watching.
Yeah. I also had a question that I didn't ask in the guided questions. So, for context, I am a GW student, an undergrad, and a big emphasis at GW specifically is interning while doing school. So working a few days while and then doing classes the other days. And I've heard from a lot of upperclassmen that it's getting harder and harder for students to get internships. So this is kind of a two-part question, but one, what advice do you guys have when marketing yourselves to get internships when I don't necessarily have the most law experience previously? And then two, piggybacking off, I know a lot of you guys said you didn't do networking in undergrad, so and maybe may not have had as much experience in law. So how did you market yourself in applications and compete with other students who may have probably been interning at law firms already in their undergraduate college experience?
I think that for you, because you're in DC, networking is going to be such a huge thing because it's like the biggest thing here. Um, but for me, networking for myself was making my re I mean, I've had some experience, um, but it was just like highlighting even like retail experience. A lot of people will tell you not to put it on there, but I think that you should always have any retail experience on there, but also just reaching out to people and seeing who they know. After every coffee chat that I did my first year, I would say, thank you so much for meeting with me. If you know any other people that you think I would connect well with, please connecting with them. And they would usually connecting with like three other people. So it was just expanding my network that way. And then whenever you do get an interview, it's perfectly fine to say that you haven't had previous experience in it, but you want to be in this field and you want to work in this field. And as long as you have a like very clear and genuine sort of interest, then you're better off for it. But also I will say, and Jishan talked about this a little bit earlier, write a thank you note. Like that will get you so far. And I love to do like a handwritten note, but a lot of people will do an email, but either are fine. So just like don't forget to thank people for their time.
I think a very quick thing is just your cover letter should be really good in any internship. I don't write robotic cover letters. I don't begin with the like, hi, my hi, my name is this. I created just a story and I write a thing that happened to me and how that's kind of related to the job. And I then elicit them to ask me questions in the interview in the hopes of getting the interview. And the likelihood is higher if you write a very interesting cover letter.
Thank you guys. If does anyone have Dennis or Saudi, do you guys have any more questions? If not, then I think we're done for today. So thank you guys so much for speaking to us.
Wait,
Oh,
wait, wait,
never
wait, wait,
mind.
wait. I
Never
have a
mind.
question.
Sorry.
So, given what you thought you were going to do when you got into it, um, and given that you're first generation, how much of what you thought you were going to do has changed? Knowing, of course, that it's going to change probably 5 or 6 times over the life of your career. But what stands out as some change now that you've been through what you've been through in terms of your plans, career plans?
Yeah, I can start. When I first went into law school, I thought I wanted to do real estate law or real estate transactions. Um, and I spent 6 months working in housing law and in tenant law, and I thought that was all very fascinating, but I very quickly realized it was not for me. And that I very much do not want to do transactional law. And I sort of just immersed myself in internships that would allow me to have the litigation experience. And now I have like sort of delved into the world of family law or just domestic relations in general, which is very litigious and I really love, but it's something I have in conjunction with my love for advertising and brand protection. And I say that they're in conjunction because family law is like what I have experience in, and then advertising is something I've done before, but it's where my true strength lie. Like I will tell any employer that I spend a lot of time on social media, and that's why I'm so qualified to speak on certain things. And they see that and they understand that and they like respect that. And so um it'll change once or twice in law school. So like go in having an expectation of something that you find interesting, but just know that you can always pivot to something else.
And let's see, you're a 2L or a 3L?
I'm a 3L. I'm graduating this
Okay.
semester.
All right. So you won't have you don't have much any time left to pick up anything else related to social media, like intellectual property and things like that.
Mhm. I have taken my fair share of classes though, so it's
Right.
yeah, I
Right. Very good. Others,
Yeah,
who made changes.
I kind of came in knowing I liked the criminal elements of law and defense, and I always liked litigation, and I think doing mock trial and taking a trial advocacy course at GW really solidified that belief. I really didn't really think that civil rights was going to be my avenue, but through networking and coffee chats and writing my note on a constitutional issue, I kind of fell in love with the Constitution again, and I really just am interested in that. I've always liked that in undergrad, so I knew maybe that would be my field during law school, but I'm in the same boat. I think I came in with the criminal side more and like defense side more, but now I'm shifting more towards like maybe civil rights, but same area of civil defense maybe.
Although you may find, like being a public defender, for instance, could get you into court and do some litigation for a while
Yeah.
with lots of understanding. Um, and that makes you very marketable after a couple of years. Others,
Well, I'm still in my first year, but I don't foresee my like desire changing, like similar to Jishan. I think I kind of came in with just like such a strong why as to why I wanted to be a lawyer and what type of law I want to do. And I do want to do public defense work, but I do think that the one thing that can change isn't just like what type of work you want to do, but where you want to do that work. And so for me, like I think I came into GW thinking like I really want to work as a public defender in DC, and I think that still is an interest, but I've really gotten to explore the broader area and like work, see the difference of the criminal system in like Virginia and Maryland as well. So I think it's not only like your general practice area might shift, but I think like what specific like region you want to practice in or what city could shift. And once you get to law school, you kind of realize how different the jurisdictions are and what laws they have. Like, I'm in criminal law right now, learning about how, like, just a different definition or test applied to, like, how someone would attempt a crime could lead to them getting, like, a vastly different sentence depending on what jurisdiction they're in. So, I think once you realize the realities of practicing the type of law you want to do, that brings, like, the second question of, like, well, then where do I want to practice? So I think it's natural to shift, and I don't know what city I'll end up working in, but I think like for all of us, it's just like you can't be scared of the change. Like you kind of have to listen to like what your experience is telling you and say like maybe I want to pivot a little bit here or explore this. And part of law school is just leveraging all of those opportunities to explore any of your interests, to figure out what you're really meant to do. And I'm happy to have all of the opportunities to do that, especially with internships and externships.
thank you. I
Yeah.
can. Oh, go ahead, Cindy.
For me, I similar to Susan and Jashawn, I came in knowing what I wanted to do and the area I wanted to do it in, but I think since the fall semester, I've been able to see that in different aspects. So whether it's litigation or transactional or even regulatory, I think I've been exposed to a little bit of each. And as I've been through our like foundation of tracks program at GW, I've been able to see, okay, what does that look like in practice and in reality? Even in our legal writing class, I see that I like writing a little bit more than I do oral advocacy. So just trying to really see what I like, but I'm also looking forward to my 2L and 3L year, taking different classes that I might not even know that I'm interested in, or even taking clinics and externships to see how I am actually in the field and just to narrow down exactly what I want to do. But I came in knowing what I wanted to do, and it's still sorry, within that same space. So we'll see how it goes.
Great. Anybody else? All right, I have one more question. Complete tangent. AI. How is AI impacting legal education?
I
I
think just
mean, oh, go for it.
my one key advice would just be don't use AI to do your readings. I don't it will make you a bad lawyer, and it will make you not build the skills of legal analysis. I try to stay away from AI as much as I can because I think it is making students not critically think. And I think, especially since I want to enter constitutional law, the abstract legal arguments that these lawyers have made for centuries, they never had a computer. So them making it is just them rereading cases and just creative the most creative arguments to further civil rights. And I think those are the best lawyers. So my advice, try not to use it, and I don't think it's good for the legal field.
Interesting.
I was just gonna talk a little bit about how I've seen it like in the classroom because like oddly enough, like my teachers this semester have used it. I had to use AI to like write an assignment in property, like essentially like um, you know, I think I had to like draft a like different like transaction, like how a real property transaction would occur using AI, and then just like write my own personal analysis on it. And then like we have a problem for like the appellate brief and like the criminal defendant like used a chat box to like basically plan out his crime. So it's very interesting to see
Interesting.
it come up in like conversation because I think it makes us confront the realities of like practitioners are using AI like in the field, and like a lot of times it's like leading to negative consequences because like the analysis that I was able to do in my class this semester really showed like the responses that AI was giving were not accurate. They were flawed, and there's such like an overwhelming amount of confidence placed in AI, and it's like unwarranted because it can't capture the nuance of legal analysis. And I guess secondarily, like it made me think about how like that is going to be a big shift, not only in the criminal sphere, but like we are going to see a lot more cases involving AI being utilized and that being submitted as evidence or disputes over it. So like I think there's value in understanding it, but I completely echo what Jishan said. I think like as a lawyer, there's so many foundational skills that you're going to need, like to be able to critically think and analyze, come up with your own arguments, and then be able to defend them and vocalize them in a courtroom. I think that those are skills that you can't get by like using AI to do that for you. And I think that like, sure, like there's been conversations about maybe it taking over blue book citations, and I don't know if any of us would have any problems with that. But I think that's very different than like using it for an entire assignment or to do all of the work, especially when law is so client-centered.
Good,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'll add to that. I've seen it in practice. I'm working for a judge right now, and she is totally against it, rightfully so. Um, and her reasoning behind it, which I totally agree with, is that like nothing is better than your brain, and so if your brain is able to produce product, then that's the best thing that you can get out of it. And like it's already been mentioned, AI is still very flawed. Last summer I was working at a divorce firm where the husband's counsel was relying on a case, and when we went to go find that case, it did not exist. And
Mm,
so it's like, why do you rely on um, like a chatbot telling you something when you can just look it up and see like what
right.
your strongest arguments are? So it's definitely it's good to know about it. It's good to be researched on, but it's not good to be using in practice.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I will. Well, why don't you go ahead and wrap up, Diwa, and then I'll close with a thank you on behalf of the Urban League.
Yeah. just to close off, I just want to say thank you guys so much for being here and for speaking. I know so many students are going to look back at this video and find it like a useful tool when thinking about their future in law. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. And um, I thought your answers were very, very helpful to not only to us, but to uh, future students. And don't miss the opportunities you have there being in Washington to really see the changes that are going on and be involved. I think it's a significant opportunity. And I want to thank all of you on behalf of the Jacksonville Urban League and the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate the fact that you're sharing your experience with so many others through our YouTube channel. So thank you. Wish all of you the best of luck, and if there's anything we can do to help you, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
guys so much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.